Hello everyone, you welcome to this edition of The Inside on Equinoxe Television. I am Bable Jonathan. Dear viewers, for health reasons, permit me put on this new look for today. And in this edition of the program, we're going to analyze deadly inter-community clashes between the Muslim and Shua Arab communities in the far north region of the Republic of Cameroon. The clashes have killed tens of persons and injured many others. Many have also been displaced in thousands and are now seeking refuge in neighboring Chad. And we'll also be taking a look at what is qualified as collective punishment inflicted on some inhabitants or indigenes of the northwest and southwest regions of the Republic of Cameroon within the context of the close to 5-year-long conflict going on there. And in one of the most recent cases, several homes were burnt down allegedly or reportedly by elements of the National Armed Forces of the Republic of Cameroon in retaliation to an attack, and that happened in the Mbengui Road neighborhood in the northwest regional chief town Bamenda. Several homes were burnt down and several persons rendered homeless. Also, in this edition of the program, we want to take a look at international football politics threatening the organization of the Africa Cup of Nations scheduled to begin on the 9th of January 2022 in the Republic of Cameroon, with the World Football Governing Body FIFA and the Association of Football Clubs in Europe pressing for that football jamboree or that football event to be postponed to June. But the president of the Confederation of African Footballers, however, emphasized on the point that the AFCON 2022 will take place in Cameroon from the 1st of January 2022. Meet our guest in some few seconds. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Our guest today, Dr. Etah Ewane, is a professor of political science at the Karlsruhe International University in Germany. Doctor, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Babila, and it's another great pleasure to be with you and millions of televiewers of Equinoxe TV. But first of all, let me seize this unique opportunity to wish a Merry Christmas. First of all, to my mother, Olga Mbule, who's watching me right now in Bangam, and to the millions of televiewers of Equinoxe TV.
Right, your mama is in Bangam.
She's
in the heat of the Anglophone crisis.
Exactly.
All right, may God protect her.
Thank you so much.
All right, now we want to start from the far north region of the country where there has been inter-community clashes between the Muslim and Shua Arab ethnic groups there, leading to several persons dead. In the recent clashes, at least 22 people are reported to have died and 30 others injured and many displaced to other localities. And this happened notably in Kusiri, and many have been displaced out of that place. Some have been displaced to neighboring Chad. And before that, there was another incident of the same magnitude that was sometime in August this year, and 45 people were killed and several dozens injured. And in these clashes, at least 20,000 Cameroonians took refuge in neighboring Chad. And at the time when this other incident happened earlier this month, according to the United Nations Human High Commission for Refugees, at least 8,500 of those who were displaced in August had not yet returned. What's your analysis of these clashes between herdsmen and farmers, notably fishermen?
Yeah, first of all, let me just try to explain or just let you know that inter-community conflicts are some of the most complicated conflicts that the world is experiencing right now. And I also want to add to the fact that inter-community conflicts are claiming more lives today than terrorist attacks. So more people die in inter-community conflicts than in terrorist attacks. And this is very common in the area where I work, in the Sahel region, where there are frequent inter-community conflicts that are claiming so many lives. And these conflicts are always organized around a common or a shared identity, and that makes it even more complicated. And quite often, it's every time you touch on a people's culture, a people's identity, you invariably attack on their very existence. It's an attack on their very existence, and they do everything to protect this because this is something they hold very dear to them, very close to their hearts. And also, it's often related to the struggle to gain access to scarce resources. And this is what we are experiencing in the northern part of Cameroon, precisely in Kuseri. It's the struggles between the herdsmen and the farmers, and this is very common because it's always the herdsmen that need grazing land for their cattle, and the agricultural communities that live on the soil for their survival. They depend on the soil for their survival, so it leads to frequent conflicts.
So what can possibly explain the disagreement between the Muslim community composed of fishermen and the Shua Arabs who have been herdsmen for thousands of years? Is it about the limited space? Is it about the water that is also limited compared to the demand?
Yeah, like I said, inter-community conflicts always revolve around the scarcity of natural resources, and people always try to gain access to these resources because whether they are Shua Arabs or they are members of the Muslim community, they all need to have access to these resources because they depend on it for their survival. For the fishermen, the water remains the only source of survival. And what we experience today with the process of desertification, because you know the Sahara Desert has been growing, so it's encroaching southwards. And with the impact of climate change, we see a reduction in water level, a drop in water levels, specifically in the Lake Chad area. The Lake Chad area is the Lake Chad is a clear demonstration of the impact of climate change because the water levels have dropped significantly. And why the water levels drop, the logical consequence is that the amount of fish in the waters also drops. So the fishes start disappearing. And these fishermen depend on this. It's for them a source of income. And practically the only source of for protein consumption in that area. And the herdsmen also, the farming community also, they need access to that water. They need to have access to water. So it's always about access to very scarce natural resources. But what is so appalling is the reaction from the leadership of this country, because while in Mauritania, I read a communique that was issued by the president of the transition committee in Chad, General Derby, calling on the Chadian people to show solidarity with the refugees that were flowing in from neighboring Cameroon. And we've not had any real reaction from the government of Cameroon, and we see a complete lack of empathy towards people that you are supposed to protect. I think the first reaction should have come from the government of Cameroon. I'm not saying they didn't do anything, but they didn't do enough, because the Chadian government showed more empathy towards the Cameroonian population than our own government. And that's quite appalling.
And talking about the management of these the clashes, it occurred in August, and several people, about 45, were killed. Many were injured, many displaced. And just a few months after that, we are in December, and then a similar thing is occurring, about 22 killed, 30,000 displaced. What's the problem? That it's coming up again and again, not within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but within the same year, in some few months, it's occurring and reoccurring. The preventive mechanism of government, what do you think about it? Is it working?
That's a clear manifestation of the fact that the government's inability to manage the multiple crises that the country is facing right now. And I must say the security and defense forces are overwhelmed. They are engaged in an unwarranted conflict in the northwest and southwest regions. They are struggling in the eastern part of the country. The northern part of the country has been a huge challenge with the Boko Haram incursion into the Cameroonian national territory. And today we are having other inter-community conflicts that are claiming lives. So it is practically impossible for the security and defense forces to be everywhere. So the government seems to be prioritizing the fight against the struggling English-speaking minority, while neglecting other conflicts that are claiming lives in the country. And so, like I said, it's a clear manifestation of the government's inability to manage the multiple crises. They do not have the necessary resources to do that. And I think this is again an opportunity for me to appeal to the leadership of this country to try to put a rapid end to the ongoing crisis in the Northwest and Southwest, so they can be able to focus on issues that are purely, the Boko Haram incursion is an external attack. It's an attack from non-indigenous forces, and so that will be a challenge to Cameroon to face. But not fighting people who are claiming for what it's a right that is recognized also in international law.
And the inter-community clashes in the far north region is just coming to add to the plight, coming to add to the sufferings of the people who have been suffering for years today as a result of sporadic incursions of Boko Haram militants. Now, about government's response, when this occurred on the 5th of December, government has responded, sure, with some aid, material aid, and so on. The Minister of Territorial Administration was deployed there, and the governor also has been there, other authorities trying to bring some aid to the people, and also deploying forces around Kuseri to be able to put an end to to contain the clashes. What do you think about this response? What is lacking in it?
What is lacking? We've become too reactive in Cameroon. The government has become too reactive. A good functional system, it's one that is proactive. Now, if the government was taking things seriously, even if they do not have effective early warning mechanisms, but then there are always signs. When the conflict is about to develop, when it starts growing, there are signs that are sent out. And I think the administrative authorities, like the SDO of Kuseri and the DO of the area, they receive some of the signs, and they should be passing on this information to the authorities that be in Yaoundé. And so what we expect, like someone who knows more about diplomacy, preventive diplomacy always pays because it saves lives. It's less costly. Sometimes it takes a lot of time, it needs a lot of effort. But I think the government should be engaging in preventing conflicts rather than making unwarranted intervention, providing food. That's not what the people are looking for. They were not hungry. They just want to be where they are, where they were born, so they can go on with their normal activities. So we need a government that is proactive, that needs to when a conflict develops, the government needs to develop appropriate methods or strategies to prevent this conflict from escalating like what we saw recently.
And those actions that should have been taken that will prevent the conflict, or that will prevent a reoccurrence of the clashes in those regions. What are some of those actions that should have been taken?
One of them would be setting up a mediation committee made up of, there are experts in the Ministry of Territorial Administration. There are respected elites from the northern part of Cameroon. There are also personalities in this country that can talk and people will listen. So when a conflict like that starts, I think the government the local authorities need to mediate. They know exactly what the problem is, and they should be able to put in place appropriate response mechanisms so they prevent the conflict from escalating into an open war that will claim lives. So the role of the government is to protect lives and not to intervene after people must have been killed. I think we're seeing a lot of killings in different parts of Cameroon, and it's time for the government to readjust and put in place effective response mechanisms. They can mediate using external people from other parts of Cameroon, or using local elites who know exactly what the problem is. Because there's nothing that pays more than always having a people that are having a dispute or that are fighting over a particular issue, having them round a table so they can talk to each other. There they'll be able to address some of the structural issues that are causing the problem, and they will find effective solutions, or durable or sustainable solutions.
No, climate change is bringing a significant pressure on the resources available for both the farmers and the herdsmen. And now some of the people may not be ready, however, to quit fishing, for example. We're talking about the Shua Arabs who have been fishermen for thousands of years, and it's become more or less something like an inheritance. The children inherit from their parents, and so on and so forth. What can be done to take some of these people out of their activities, out of the fishing which they have been doing for years, which they have inherited from their forefathers, to begin to do something else in order to reduce the pressure on the resources?
Yeah, like you rightly said, Babila, climate change is having an enormous impact on the two communities, because it's the soil that is affected, the water levels are dropping, the productivity of the land is decreasing, it's diminishing at an alarming rate. And like I said, because of the encroaching the process of desertification, the desert that is moving southwards. We know, for example, I know maybe from the 70s, that there was something in this country that was called Operation Green Sahel. That was an operation that was meant to fight the process of desertification, and it was actually offering the farmers hope that they could continue living in their own areas. Now, what would be the effective response from a government? I mean, it is wrong for us to live in a country in which a grandfather was a fisherman, the son becomes a fisherman, the grandson becomes a fisherman. I mean, that's a collective failure. A failure on the part of the government and a failure on the part of the community. The role of the government is to create opportunities. Now, let's go to the area where the people have been fighting. What are the opportunities that exist for the young people in this area? Are there any good schools? So you need to offer people education, quality education, so they can be able to fend for themselves. A child that has an ordinary level, advanced level in this country will be able to find their own way. They might not necessarily get into a NAM, because we don't want to talk about that. Those are schools that are reserved for the privileged few. But then they can use their brains to do other things that would give them the possibility to live a decent life. So the government should be offering people the possibility to live decent lives in their own communities without having to move down to Yaoundé or to Douala to look for opportunities. So the opportunities should be brought to those people. What we see in this country where the government has failed the most is on the localization of industries. How can you concentrate all industries around Douala and Yaoundé? It simply doesn't work. If you move a company in a remote area in the eastern part of Cameroon, what happens? People will start moving to that area to look for jobs in that company. And they will start, as they move, they will start developing that area, because people will start acquiring land to build settlements. And when one company comes, that company depends on resources that are produced by another company. And so for the sake of saving costs, another company might be forced to create their facilities around the company that depends on the resources that they are producing. So you see, this is something we see in Europe. They're moving companies, spreading companies around the country. So to a kind of, it's a way of redistributing wealth in the country. So this is something that has failed the government of Cameroon.
Opportunities that will persuade the people to leave some of the things that they have been doing for thousands of years, which they have inherited from their forefathers, and so on, chasing animals on the hills, to start doing something else. I want to believe that a mechanical engineer, a young mechanical engineer, would not go and be chasing animals on the hills or running into the water to get fish and things like that. Now, the training aspect is there, and of course there is another aspect of creating an enabling environment, because there may be certainly some of the young people who may want to do other activities, who may want to carry on other activities, business, away from fishing, but the environment becomes too difficult, even hostile, and hindering them from thinking about another thing, thinking about another activity, thinking about leaving the fishing. They will just remain in their comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is one of the major failures of our government as well. Now, giving young people the impression that they all have to get into the public service is totally wrong. It's totally wrong. We train students every year, and most of my graduate students do not go to look for employment. The final projects they always submit for evaluation are actually business projects. And they get into real life, they have access to credit from banks. So you have a lofty project, a great idea, it is financed by a bank, and you become self-reliant. And in turn, you create jobs for others. And so this is what we should be doing. If you look at the northern part of Cameroon, I think people get involved in petty trades. People have extraordinary skills in producing leather shoes, leather wallets, leather bags. This is a whole industry that can be developed. But for them to be able to do that, they have the skills, but they need the resources. They don't have the resources. So why don't we think that we can create credit facilities for these people with entrepreneurial skills? So we offer them the opportunity to become self-reliant. And for everyone who opens their own workshop, gets their own machinery, they will be forced to hire other people because they will not be able to do those jobs by themselves. So you need to critique the opportunities to the people. And when we move around Douala and look at all the security guards, they are coming from a specific part of Cameroon. And that's sending a very wrong message. And this is because they do not have opportunities. It's not acceptable that a young man, a degree holder from a part of Cameroon, has to move down to Douala to become a security guard. So how do you think that family, when people educate their children, they do so with the hope that that child or those children will be able to take them out of the vicious cycle of poverty? Now, if they go, they get the education, come out of the universities and become security guards, they can barely feed themselves, talk less of helping other family members. And so you keep them perpetually into this vicious cycle of poverty. And so our government needs to think beyond this. It's not about the public service. In Europe, very few people go into the public service. First of all, jobs in the public service are far less remunerative than those in the private sector. So we should have a government that is financing the private sector, giving them access to credit so they can create job opportunities for the Cameroonian young youths.
Right. And just a little bracket there to talk about the security. Many of them coming from the northern regions of the country. Many of them have not gone to school. When you talk to many of them, they didn't finish primary school, and many of them are being exploited by those security companies. Some of them are receiving as little as 20, 30,000 francs, whereas there are companies that are paying for them 200, 150,000 francs and so on. But they are in a kind of modern slavery today.
Yeah, it's sad, but that's the reality of our country. Now, Why are they coming? Why, when you do not create opportunities for young people, what do you expect from them? I had the opportunity to do research in the northern part of Cameroon, the very beginning of the Boko Haram terrorism. And most of the young people I met who were enrolled in the ranks of Boko Haram had the same response whenever I asked them, why did you join a terrorist organization? And they said, like, we didn't have anything to do. So who should be creating opportunities for these people? Why do we have a government? Who should be creating jobs? We should have an educational policy in this country, and I think it exists. Everyone, education, it's a fundamental human right. So every child should be given at least the basic education. Every child should have at least a first school living certificate in this country. And so when children do not go to school, what has been the government's response? And this is happening in specific parts of the country. It's not everywhere. So are some Cameroonians born to serve other Cameroonians as slaves? Are they born to be perpetual security officers? Not security per se, to be guards, security guards. And so it hurts to see that this has become a practice in our country, and I think something needs to be done.
All right, we're going to take a look at what the newspapers reported this week. Immaculate Fogwe takes us to the newsstands, the press review, and after that, we'll talk about collective punishment in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon.
Eden exclaims, taxing Jangi groups. The paper explains the draft bill for the amendment of Article 93 of the General Tax Code. The Star, Minister Paula Tanganji visits Kuseri after intertribal clashes between the Musgum and Arab Shua communities. As reported by The Voice, attacks on schools, shocking toll on teachers and students. The Horizon questions whether President Paul Biya will avert another glissement of the 2021 African Cup of Nations. The Post quotes Dr. Mercy Gams, chairperson of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Corruption is the greatest hindrance to economic development. The Median. Amid fears of postponement due to COVID-19, the Confederation of African Football (CAF) reaffirms AFCON will hold as planned in Cameroon.
Thank you, Immaculate Fogwe, for the press review. Now we're talking about what is qualified as collective punishment in the northwest and southwest regions of the country within the context of the close to 5-year-long armed conflict going on there. And this is something that's been happening again and again. And in the last of such incidents, several homes were burnt down, allegedly, reportedly by soldiers at Mbengui Road in the northwest regional capital, Bamenda, and several persons were in that home. People died in that incident, which came as a retaliation to an attack by separatist fighters on a military vehicle. Dr. Etah Ewane, what do you think about this?
I think what I think is that from the beginning of the conflict in the northwest and the southwest, if you look at it carefully, you would say that the rate of radicalization has increased tremendously. So more and more people are being radicalized, and essentially young people. And one of the factors that has contributed to this extreme radicalization, it's this phenomenon of collective punishment. It's not everybody in the northwest and the southwest that is a separatist. It's not every young person that is engaged in the fighting. And when you, because maybe a couple of persons committed atrocities and you decide to burn down an entire village, you radicalize everybody in that village. So you win souls for the separatist movement. That shows how desperate the the security forces have become. That shows that, again, it's a clear demonstration of the fact that they do not have a solution to the conflict. It shows the level of frustration. They are unable to defeat the Amba fighters militarily, and therefore they decide to collectively punish the people. And every time you do that, at least you recruit one or two more Amba fighters, because if a young man comes home, he doesn't see the father's home anymore. The brother or the sister is killed, who was never an Amba fighter. You leave him with no other choice than to pick up the guns. And I'm sorry to say this, the burning down of villages, burning down of homes, inflicting collective punishment on a people is inherently a war crime. And so the military, those engaged in this, involved in such practices, are committing a war crime. And like I say, the time for atonement, it's soon. People will have to pay for everything they are doing. If they think they are anonymous in the burning down of villages, I am telling them today they're fooling themselves, because there are satellite images. Okay? Satellites are getting all this, and when it's time to judge those who committed war crimes, there will be enough evidence to prosecute them.
The Ministry of Defense, however, rejected the allegations, but a report by the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, CHADA, actually indicated that the burning of the houses at Bengui, or in Bengui Road neighborhood in Bamenda, was done by the military, the Cameroonian armed forces. Now, when this happens, and the people who had nothing to do with whatever struggle are punished in this manner, what will the people think about the military at a time when the top military authorities are trying to build a kind of synergy with the population, with civil or military activities? At the same time, this is happening.
Yeah, the success of any military victory in a conflict depends so much on the relationship between the civilian population and the military. And whenever you have whenever the trust between the civilian population and the military is broken down, military victory becomes impossible. The military depends on those they call the terrorists, so to speak, are part of the civilian population. And the military can only tap the best information from within the civilian population. But when these people no longer trust you, you will never get any information. And I think this is what is happening on the ground. The Cameroonian military has lost the trust of the people of the Northwest and the Southwest. And so there is very little collaboration between the civilians and the military. And again, this type of actions that we are seeing on the ground in the Northwest and the Southwest has gone to further convince even the common Southwesterner or Northwesterner who still believed in the possibility of a one Cameroon, that a peaceful coexistence with the eastern part of Cameroon is no longer possible. Yeah, if these are the people you call your brothers, and they inflict this kind of punishment on you with little or no empathy, then they help to convince you that they are not brothers, they are enemies, and that a peaceful coexistence with such people is not possible. And this is what I keep on saying, that the Southern Cameroon or Ambazonia will become a reality, not because the Ambazonians fought so hard, but because the government, with the support of its military, continue to make systematic mistakes every day. And every mistake they make brings Ambazonia closer to reality. And if they do not react, if they do not think otherwise, and adopt the appropriate methods, essentially negotiation, to put this conflict to an end, Ambazonia will become reality someday, like Kosovo did, like the Southern Sudan recently did.
When you listen to some of the military officers and even the top officials, you have the impression that they don't really have any other option but to respond in this manner. because of the fact that, as you indicated earlier, those that they're fighting against are mixed up with the population. You cannot really pick them out, single them out easily. And so when there is an attack on a military vehicle, like what happened in the Mbengwe Road neighborhood, the response usually comes this way, because it's difficult to single out those who perpetrated the attack, those who launched the explosive device against the military vehicle.
Yeah, I think the Cameroonian military should be learning from the experience of some of the most sophisticated armies in the world. I'm talking here about the US Army. After over 10 years, over a decade in Afghanistan, fighting an asymmetric warfare, it became very clear to the American authorities that despite the level of sophistication, despite the huge investments made in Afghanistan, that it was not possible for them to win the war against the Taliban, because the Taliban were everywhere. They were within the police that was fighting side by side with the US Army. They were within the army, the Afghan army that was fighting side by side with the US Army. And so it became clear for them that a military solution was not possible. And so the US government had to negotiate with the Taliban. And so if people keep on telling Cameroonians, you do not negotiate with terrorists, I am telling them they know nothing about conflict. And I'm sorry to say this, most of the people in the Cameroonian army do not have any experience in conflict. I can say that with authority because I've served in conflicts, and I'm still serving in an area that is prone of conflict right now, covering 5 countries, though I do not have to mention them here. I think I have more experience in conflict, and I'm involved in the political process, and I know exactly what you need to do to bring a violent conflict to a rapid end. And we need to do that in Cameroon right now. As we already find ourselves in a situation of helplessness. Cameroon is unable to help itself, and that's why you see, out of frustration, talk to the military officers also. Most of them are frustrated. Now, when you see a colleague killed in the most bestial manner in the field, sometimes you're pushed to react in the wrong way, especially considering the fact that the Cameroonian army is not properly trained on issues of human rights and international humanitarian law. Now, this is what we are doing in the Sahel right now, training the Sahelian forces on issues of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, and we've developed what they call, with the help of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, they have the Human Rights Compliance Net framework for the G5 Sahel countries. And so these are some of the things that we need to do. We need to start training Cameroon. Of course, you have a right to go to war, but when you do, there is also the law of war. So you need to respect certain standards. It's not because I killed a member of your family, one member, that you will have to kill 2,000 members of my own community. Then the principle of reciprocity doesn't apply. So there is the law of war that needs to be respected. So in the combat field, there are basic rules that need to be respected, most especially by the uniformed officers. Of course, we would expect the armbars to do the same, but this is not an organized army. This is not a trained army. And if they act with impunity, the army should not act in impunity. We've had cases where armed combatants have been arrested. Now, when you arrest somebody as a trained military officer, what do you expect it to do? The first thing you have to do is protecting the physical integrity of that person. Now, but when you summarily execute them, you commit a war crime. And these are things that we find on the field. We have sufficient evidence that these summary executions are taking place on the field.
Now they see a recent video going viral of some 3 or 4 soldiers torturing an indigene of the northwest region, and some of them, we can hear some of them in the video saying, we are not really sure that is an amber fighter. Please allow him don't cut his legs. I mean, don't wound him with the machete. We're not sure that he's a number fighter, but at the same time, the others are saying no. We have to deal with him. He has the mark and things like that. What's your reading of this kind of punishment inflicted on people who are not, who have not been clearly identified as those referred to as armed separatists or whatever?
I think that again sends another message. What they are telling the young Anglophones is that you have to leave your villages. You have to migrate. You have to flee. Because staying in your own village, where you were born, where you have your own means of livelihood, becomes life-threatening. Just being there makes you a number fighter. And they should, like I say, within the G5 Sahel joint force, we push towards the European Union help to finance a project to create what they call the police component, which is made up of two units. You have a gendarmerie unit that is in charge of responsible for preliminary investigation, and you have the specialized investigation unit, which is a police unit that takes on the investigations. When they become lengthy, they take over in order to prepare, to set in motion the process of judicialization. And so this is what you have Cameroonian soldiers going on the field. They are on a combat field. And there is no gendarmerie or police presence within the units that are in the combat field. And so they commit atrocities with impunity. So we should have police units accompanying the army units that are on operation, so they can lead on investigation in cases like what we saw in the video. And now, if you need to lead an investigation, you already have someone arrested. As a uniformed officer, protect his physical integrity and open the necessary procedure of judicialization so he can be prosecuted. If found guilty, there are laws in the land that will apply. Now, when you take the laws into your hand to punish someone, you inherently commit a crime as well. And now we have videos. I expected to have a vigorous reaction from the Minister of Defense. So such individuals should be punished as that will be a deterrence policy towards all other military officers, just sending a clear message that you cannot act with impunity simply because you find yourself in a battlefield. Of course, we're not asking the military officers to allow themselves to be killed. They too have the right to self-defense, but in this situation, that did not apply. You had already neutralized the young man, and so why do you have to beat him? And in the most brutal manner.
Earlier this week, 2 children were killed, reportedly in the course of indiscriminate shooting in Ngomgam neighborhood in Bamenda. Now, indiscriminate shooting, is it allowed?
It's not possible. It's not possible. You should have clear military targets. You can't come in a town that is inhabited by civilians. You are in a civilian neighborhood and you start shooting indiscriminately. I say it again. It's a demonstration of the level of frustration within the Cameroonian army. They do not have a solution anymore. And so they keep on moving from one war crime to another. You can't shoot indiscriminately in a civilian neighborhood because your goal is to avoid collateral damages. You have to avoid civilian casualties. And so you should have clear military targets, and you should have a strategy, a clear strategy on how to achieve these military objectives. When you set up objectives, have a strategy on how to achieve these objectives while at the same time trying as hard as possible to minimize collateral damages.
Doctor, I just want us to come back on some of the rules that should be respected by both parties, because the atrocities are coming from both sides. There's the rules in international law, in humanitarian law, that should be respected by both parties to avoid crimes against humanity, war crimes, and all of those things that are happening, that have been recorded here and there in the two English-speaking regions of the country.
Yeah, first of all, like I said, summary executions are forbidden in international law. Like I said before, when you neutralize even a military target, the first thing you have to do is protect your fiscal integrity. Means there's no torture, is not allowed. They deserve to be treated fairly. They need to have access to a lawyer. They should be given access to medication if they depend on medication. And in case of hurt, they should be treated. They should be given access to a medical doctor. There are places that are protected under international law. What we see in the Northwest and Southwest, we've seen quite often military incursions into hospitals where they go to search for so-called wounded amber fighters. You don't have to, those places are protected. You can burn down schools. Schools are protected. You don't have to target civilian populations. So there are a couple of things that are prohibited under international law that you need to protect.
And somebody told me recently that his two aunts were abducted and a ransom of 10 million requested. And they tried to say, okay, this is all what we have, 2 million. Can you free them for us? And one of the persons abducted, kidnapped in a critical health condition, kidnapped, of course, by non-state or armed separatist fighters. This kidnapping that has been going on and other crimes like this happening, what do you say about it?
Yeah, kidnapping for ransoms, it's a criminal activity that develops in most conflicts. Now what we are saying here, a vacuum has been created and criminals have set in to occupy that vacuum, because there's practically a security vacuum in most areas of the Northwest and the Southwest regions where the law of anarchy reigns. And so you have a few criminals who come in, kidnap people, and ask for ransom. In this situation, this is what frustrates me most in this ongoing conflict. Now, if you are an amber fighter and you engage in the kidnapping of the people of the Northwest and Southwest, you are a criminal, and you deserve to be dealt with accordingly. In such situations, I will ask even the populations to denounce anyone kidnapping people who are already suffering a lot. Our people have been exposed to so much suffering. People are barely surviving. And you come again, most of these people are surviving today because they have relatives in the diaspora that are able to send some money for them to survive. And then you come to kidnap these people, ask them for a ransom of 2 million francs. Where do you expect them to get this money from? So did you launch the war to get money, to make money? Is it a money-making war? I thought people said they were fighting to liberate the people of the southern Cameroons. Do you liberate them through kidnappings? So kidnapping, for me, is a criminal activity that needs to be fought against with everything that we have. Our people deserve to live their lives in dignity, and we should do everything in our capacity to protect this, to offer them at least the minimum opportunity to live their lives in decency. What we see right now in most of our villages, our people are living their lives in squalor. They are living in conditions of extreme poverty and widespread fear. So we should contribute in giving them that sense of security back, that they can live in their own communities with their own brothers without being afraid of being kidnapped. Because they are not kidnapped by the military, they are kidnapped by people who call themselves Amber fighters. But I'm sorry to say this, most of the people engaged in kidnappings are not Amber fighters. These are criminal gangs that have organized themselves to try to make the best out of a worsening situation.
Right, we're going to take some interviews right now, and when we come back, we'll talk about international football, politics threatening the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations, scheduled to start from the 9th of January 2022 in the Republic of Cameroon. Stay with us.
Attack me when that gun where they shoot us, so will they come up go height? Will they come back so they even get something for chop?
I've been there for my first century for corner market, so the guns them, they never can stand up for the door. So for long with my life, the time I promote 5 years bullshit.
Mom always taught me how to trust in God, even when she's in her absence. I can remember Allah saying to me, don't allow education to take the place of God in you. So I believe wherever she is now, she's happy with me.
I was thinking that my daughter will bury me. I'm surprised to see that I'm instead burying my daughter. You people should pray for me. I am not feeling fine. I am really broken in my heart, in my spirit.
The first day they put, when they removed the chain, we came out in there and beat the child again. And so when they wanted to remove that yesterday, the child was saying that if they remove the father, will still come and beat him. So that's when we took all the child's dress and squad that there were fresh marks of canes. Beating a child of about 5-6 years and putting wounds on the child's body, whatsoever thing the child did, it is inhuman.
I think this is a clear proof to the people of Gambia, like I told them today, that peace is priceless, and the government has recognized our loyalty and respect for state institutions, and this is pay-off time with the government. The government has donated us, given us huge consignment of medical equipment to this hospital that will benefit not only people of Gambia, Donga Mantu, but will benefit other people from the other division.
To render more possible and more modern the alternative route passing through Magwambo, so Taba, Ndu and Kambe, so that the population of this division continues to feel reasonably loved. Number 2, to provide this population with an alternative source of energy, in particular the solar energy.
I don't have a particular problem with the mayor. My problem is that when we were doing a campaign, I told my population where I come from, Yato, we promised them that we need to supply them water at Mulanga and Bassa. But since over getting to 2 years, nothing has been done. And each time I go to the mayor and I lay the complaint to him, he said I will look into it. The street light I have never got. The temporary, when the electric solar, I have never got. So I have never benefited anything in my area from that council.
Things are very dear. Even the jean trouser that we usually take from Douala at lower price like 4-5. We come here to sell it at 5,000, 5,000. It depends the way customer will buy it. But this year, when you take it at 4,500 francs, you came here in Banga, you will sell it at 3,500. You even force them to take it back at that 4,500 francs. They are not taking it.
For rice, rice is very expensive. The rice I will usually buy half bag for 11,000 now is 13,000. Mayo from 5,000 to 7 something. Fish, even the mackerel fish, I don't really know what's happening. For our chicken, to have chicken now, chicken is very, very rare. And even if you see one small chicken that they can, at first, they were giving for 3,000, you see it now, the price 6,000 or 7,000.
I like that small toys, just like a vehicle, because children like it so much to play with it during Christmas. And they are expensive now. too expensive. I'm unable to have it.
I want something playful, colorful, without any dangerous, not being dangerous for the kids. So that's why I want maybe fun glasses for them, cars, and then the 2022 flyers. So I just actually want something colorful, playful for the children.
We are very clear in terms of our commitment to make the AFCON a success in Cameroon. I'm very confident that we will work together with the people of Cameroon, who are a proud football nation, who have made Cameroon proud and Africa proud. And I'm confident that in our meetings, both today and tomorrow, we will be able to come out of here and give the world, give Africa and give the world the confidence that we have, the commitment to our people in Cameroon, and the commitment to the development and growth of football in Africa.
Those were interviews of the week. We are still with our guest, Dr. Etah Ewane, Professor of Political Science at the Karlsruhe International University in Germany. Doctor, the World Football Governing Body, FIFA, and the Association of Football Clubs in Europe are mounting pressure for the AFCON to be shifted, to be postponed to June. And that will simply mean that it will not be organized in Cameroon. It will either be taken to Morocco or those northern African countries, because that period of June is a season of serious rainfall in sub-Saharan Africa. What do you think about this international pressure, international politics in the domain of football, mounting pressure on Africa to change its own calendar to meet with the calendar of the European clubs, who are also talking about issues of players who may be wounded during the AFCON, players who may not be able to return to their clubs if borders are shut down with the Omicron virus, Omicron variant of the COVID-19 going viral, and things like that?
Yeah, I'm surprised that you are surprised that the Europeans are putting a lot of pressure on the Africans. And now, professional football in Europe is a business. People are investing fortunes into football. You have huge investors putting in a lot of money and paying fabulous sums to these players. So it is their legitimate right to protect their interests, because they are the ones paying the salaries of these African footballers. However, we know also that there is an agreement between UEFA, FIFA, and the other world football federations, including the African Football Federation, that clubs, between the clubs. So the clubs should not impede any player from taking part in a national in a tournament in which his or her their national team is involved.
The FIFA
now they are protecting their interests, but it is the responsibility of the Africans to protect their own interests also, and be categorical on this. We cannot allow Europeans at every time to impose their will on us. So the Africans need to take a common stance. It is the African football, the African Cup of Nations, and it is the responsibility for the Africans to set a date that is appropriate for the African countries, taking into consideration the different climatic conditions that we have. You cannot ask people in Africa, in Cameroon, to organize a Nations Cup in June when it's raining. So it's impossible, it's unacceptable. But the Europeans, I say, they have a legitimate right to protect their interests, and we have to defend ourselves with everything we have, be categorical. There is no negotiation about this. It's the African Nations Cup and not the European Nations Cup. And the players have a right to use the FIFA clause to say, hey, it's our national team and we have to play.
And the rules of the World Football Governing Body, FIFA, compels the clubs to release the players whenever there is a national competition coming up that they need to take part, in which they need to take part. But this atmosphere of uncertainty has been there, and even though the president of the Confederation of African Football, Dr. Patrice Motsepe, said when he visited the presidency, when he talked with the president of the Republic, Paul Biya, he said that the AFCON is going to start on the 9th of January 2022. But the atmosphere of uncertainty, and there are also issues of preparation that are there, and so on.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of hand-wringing about the inability of the leadership of this country to draw lessons from the manifest errors of our country's recent history. Now, I think they opened up this Pandora box, giving everyone the opportunity today to request for the postponement of the AFCON that is due to begin in Cameroon from January 9th. That's because of the lack of seriousness. And all of this is again linked to issues of governance in this country. How do we explain the fact, or how do we even convince anyone that what we've not been able to achieve in 6 years, in 4 years, that we'll be able to do that in 2 weeks? We are just a few weeks away. The 9th of January, it's just by the corner. And Mr. Babila, we all have to be, what is lacking in this country is honesty. And they always justify that on the so-called principle of patriotism. Patriotism doesn't mean you have to go out and refuse facts. Patriotism means standing for your nation and facing the facts. And the fact is, Cameroon is not really ready to host the African Nations Cup. I'm sorry, you can see in the Times that most of the work is not completed. And we're knowing what these people are and how they work. We're not sure that they will complete most of the work by the 9th of January. We've had enough time. Cote d'Ivoire was awarded the next Nations Cup after Cameroon, and they've completed their work. So what is wrong with Cameroonians? So rather than pointing accusing fingers at others and holding them responsible for our miseries, we should go back deep in ourselves and ask ourselves this important question: are we doing the right things? Are we making the right decisions? How do we explain the fact that a tournament that was awarded to Cameroon 5-6 years ago, Cameroon is still struggling to complete the stadium? Cameroon is still struggling to fix the roads. I left, yesterday I left Marché de Fleurs to go to Bonaberi. It took me over 3 hours. And if I was not a child that grew up in Douala, I would have had difficulty to leave Bonapriso because the roads were blocked everywhere. They blocked the main road, and everywhere you tried to go, the traffic was congested. The traffic was jammed everywhere. Now, is this what I think some of the teams will have to lodge at hotels around Bonapriso? And with this kind of traffic, some of the teams will get to the field at the end of the match. So we should question ourselves whether we are doing the right things. How prepared are we?
However, the president of the Confederation of African Football, Dr. Patrice Motsepe, said we have to trust in ourselves. We have to believe the authorities. We have to look at things from a positive perspective and know that we're going to have the best AFCON in Cameroon come 9 January 2022. Are we really looking up to that? Dr. Etah Ewane, political scientist or professor of political science at the Karlsruhe International University. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for this end of year program. We wish you all the best. Stay with us.